Thank you guys for joining. It's super nice to have you guys all here. Not everyone showed up. That is normal for webinars. We usually see about a 50% drop off. So that's great that you guys are here, because my goal for today is to really give you guys a lot of insights that we have gathered over the many years of working with brands that are trying to tap into the Gen Z audience, right? The Gen Z market, and how do you actually reach them? And we found a lot of conspiracy theories or myths, if you want to call them that, about the Gen Z audience and what are they into? What do they like? What kind of marketing do they like? And we wanted to give you guys all that knowledge, and maybe some of you are already working with these audiences, so you probably have some of your own insights, which I would love to hear about those if they go against our insights. This is, it's not gospel, it's what we found works the best. And for every product, every industry, it's always going to be a little bit different, but these are some of the things that we found. So thank you guys so much for joining. And if you have questions, please kind of use them in the chat, right in the chat, the questions that you might have. And we will try to tackle those at the end. There is time for that. And yeah, if you can do that, that'd be amazing. This is also a Google Meet, so there is an opportunity later I can open it up so you guys can actually have your mics on and you can ask the questions that way as well, if you don't have a problem being on microphone. So yeah, so thanks. Without further ado, let's go right into it here. So Gen Z marketing, the truth on how to reach them. So a little bit about us. If you guys don't know who I am or who our agency is, my name is Chris Cubbernis. Some people call me Chris Cubby. I've been sort of an influencer, content creator. I've been in advertising since I was young, since I was 14 years old, sweeping floors at an ad agency that I took an internship at. So I love the game of marketing. I love the game of advertising. And I started my own agency about 9 years ago and really focused on social media. And our motto is be social first or be last. We really find that social media is the channel that is the most important these days. And if you're not doing this well, you are losing the game typically. We've had lots of great customers over the years. I bring some up here that we've had the honor of working with and helping navigate these difficult waters of social media, and also the Gen Z audience, mostly Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 brands. That's typically who our bread and butter is, who usually comes to us, and we work with them. Everybody from Iceland Air to Olaplex to Naturally, Hummel, makeup brands, fintech brands, all over the map. We've worked with a various different industries, and that's also given us a lot of insight and a lot of experience. So getting into this, the reality check. The thing is that the Gen Z audience is probably the most studied or the most talked about audience ever. It's quite interesting how they've become a hot topic within the marketing world. So they're more studied than any other audience out there. And I would say they're probably one of the most misunderstood audiences. We have a lot of misconceptions about them. We have a lot of data on them. And there is a lot of things attributed to the Gen Z audience, which may or may not be true. I tend to think it's not true, and I'll go through what those are today. But yeah, this is one of the most studied audiences. And the reality is that it probably shouldn't be. And I'll get into why. One of the reasons why I think we're a little, screwed up about this audience, or we don't have a good handle on it as in marketing in general, is because we're kind of operating on old maps. And what I mean by that is that we're using the 2005 GPS Garmin when those maps don't work anymore. That GPS doesn't work anymore. And the terrain really has shifted. And that's really based on sort of the values of the culture have shifted globally, the tech that we're seeing, the different, the different channels that have come up in the last few years, the different ways of marketing. So we're operating in a completely different landscape. But this is the same for every single generation, right? It's not just the Gen Z audience. This is for everybody. Boomers, Gen Z, Gen Xers, millennials, zillennials, Gen Z, and now Gen Alpha. everybody's sort of in this different landscape now. So Gen Z isn't special in that regard. It's everybody is dealing with the multitude of platforms, the different ways of reaching audiences, the different cultural shifts that we're seeing. So Gen Z is not really that important in this. What's important is that all of us are dealing with these old maps that we used to use for marketing, and those have changed, and we need to address that. We need to do it differently. Who are Gen Z? I think it's important that we sort of map it out, because sometimes this gets a little bit wishy-washy. Essentially, they say born between 1996 and 2010. The thing is that you will find that you'll have what we call Zillennials, which are millennial Gen Zers. We have a lot of those in our company, I would say, in our agency. They are just on the cusp, and they have tendencies of Gen Z, I would say, but are millennial in sort of age, which is interesting. I think that all of us tend to be trying to be younger these days. I know I am. I would like to look like I'm 35 for the rest of my life. I know that's not the case, but that's, all of us want to be young, look young, feel young, and that is also the case with Gen Zers. So our millennials feel like they feel like Gen Zers now. So they're digital natives. They're super fluent in hyperconnectivity, and that means they're connected on every platform. They're out there. They're also socially aware. They're value driven. They're very much about what values do they have? What do they think is valuable in this world? They're about experiences. They're highly entrepreneurial and creative, and they're deeply affected by mental health challenges. You'll see that mental health issues have been rising, and the chaos or the uncertainty in the world is sort of driving that. But that's the same for almost everybody, I would say. And the mental health is obviously a giant topic these days, not just for Gen Z, but for all generations. They in particular are the ones driving a lot of these conversations about, hey, I need to be successful in this world, but I don't want to sacrifice my mental health for it. So this is what McKinsey sort of puts in as their Gen Z audience. I think it holds true. So if you're trying to reach these people, they're roughly, 20 to, well, no, they're a little bit, they could be younger. Like my son is 15. I would consider him a Gen Z. So he's 15 and sort of 15 to 25-year-old sort of is that range that we're looking at right now. Myth number one on my list here is they invented their culture. So we tend to think of Gen Z as like this totally different animal that exists out there that, invented their own way of living and their own way of life. And the truth is that they're just reacting to decades of, and I say broken promises. I don't know how reactive that is, but it's basically saying that all the things that we've seen over the last few decades with the financial crisis, the housing crisis, the climate crisis, the whatever, the war in Ukraine, like all of these, the war, like, the immigration crisis with people coming from Syria and all these different things that have hit them over the years. There's been a lot of political chaos. There's a lot of, what they would consider environmental neglect and, the hyper targeted marketing overload. So they have just existed in this world, right? We've made this world and they've existed in it, and they're trying to survive in this world. And I think it's important that we take this survival strategy mindset towards how do we actually build great marketing, build great products, build great businesses that are directed towards them. Having this idea that, oh, they didn't invent this. This didn't come out of nowhere. It's a necessity, or it's a survival mode sort of thing. And part of this, which is contributing to what's kind of hard to nail when it comes to marketing to them, is that they have a lot of identity churn. Identity churn is the default setting. And what I mean by that is they've kind of grown up in this disposable identity world, right? Each drop, each ad, each trend, each new thing that came out promised some new meaning, right? Only for a week. Like we've seen it ourselves. The trends that come nowadays are way faster and way more short-lived than we had in the past. I mean, when I was a kid, I don't know if there's any millennials here and remember Pogs. If you guys remember Pogs, this game, and also like Tamagotchi and things like that, like these things were fads, but they did last about a year, maybe two, if you really want to stretch it. Nowadays, fads and trends go by so fast, and they're so fragmented, and that's really what's contributing to this identity churn, is that you have different things coming up all the time. So they're jumping over here, jumping over there, and they didn't design this cycle. Actually, they're just fluent in it. They're just really good at living in that. So when it comes to marketing these people, you have to take that into consideration, that we used to believe that marketing, you had to create this brand identity and you had to really speak to this specific audience. But if you're talking to Gen Z, it's a little bit more fragmented. It's a little bit more, you can be multiple different things to different people within this group. And that's kind of interesting. And I'll explain how you can attack marketing with this mindset in a bit here. So, and we've kind of shamed them for this. And I think this is one of the things that we need to get away from when it comes to marketing. And I know when I sort of do it myself, I kind of like, oh, those damn Gen Zers, as I, shake my fist like an old man trying to get people off their lawn. But the reality is that they are just operating in this system. They are just living in this system. And the system is really where attention is currency, where consumption of products, ideas, concepts, content, it's really about belonging. The latest, if you can see how Gen Z or Gen Alpha, they talk, they add so many different, what would you call them? Slangs almost weekly. Something new is coming out on the slang side of things. And that is about belonging for them. That is, if they're using the right lingo, if they're seeing the right memes, if they're seeing the right products, if they're buying the right Stanleys, wearing the right, jeans, whatever it is, they really want to belong. And because of the identity churn, it's really difficult, because one week it's this, the next week is that. So it's really a big part of what they're doing. So if you can help them jump on those trains, if you can be a part of those things, then you can actually do really well. Moving on. The next myth is Gen Z doesn't care about brands. The truth is that they care deeply when brands actually stand for something. But like I said, if only for a short time. Right. And I use this picture of Teslas burning and somebody roasting marshmallows on them. And so it says Elon wears pink Crocs to Klan rally. So I find this image extremely funny. And I thought it was appropriate for the current climate that we're in, the current media landscape, because it highlights an important thing. Yesterday's Tesla is today's Nazis. And that's a really weird way of looking at how the world works these days, specifically for Gen Z. But they're seeing these things. They're seeing these quick identity churns, and they're jumping on whatever sort of identity they can to jump onto based on their values of the day. And those things will change, right? Yesterday was climate change. Today it's burning Tesla. So following that as a brand is extremely difficult. I would say to a place where brands probably need to stay out of political territory for a long time, because it's such a shifting sand. It's such a shifting landscape all the time. We used to think that, okay, brands need purpose and we need to fight for this climate thing and fight for this, equality thing. And we're seeing that fade away a little bit, because brands have been over here for a little bit, then over here. And then it's hard for them as a corporation to really stand for anything, because it's moving around so much. And that's largely driven by the landscape that we live in, and largely driven by this new generation that is also in these churn areas as well for their identity. So for brands, I think it's really about standing for things that make sense for you, really narrowing your focus, and not jumping around, not following these things, because you will have whiplash trying to go from over here to over here this week. Okay, we're dealing with this issue, and this week you can't do that. You have to make it make sense for your brand, because they will see right through that, and I'll get to that. The next myth is that Gen Z has no attention span. The truth is actually that they have zero tolerance for boring. They scroll fast not because they can't focus, but because 90% of the content isn't worth their 98% of the content isn't worth their time. So that they know, they can smell when something is good, and they don't have an attention span issue because they can binge for 6 hours or 5 hours or 3 hours on something that they really love. I've seen my kids do it. I'm sure you've seen your kids, or if you've got young family members or friends who have young kids at home, or adults, young adults. They can sit there and watch a stream of a YouTuber for hours and hours and hours, or they can binge watch through 3 hours of somebody playing a video game, or a Mr. Beast video where they're trying to do some challenge. And so they don't have an issue with that. They have an issue with boring. So being really good at keeping attention, not just getting attention, but keeping attention as a brand is really important. And not only that, it's like sometimes you have to recognize that as a brand, that's not your space to be in anyway. You're not a Mr. Beast. You're not a gamer. So you have to also play where you can play and make the moves that you can move. We've seen a lot of brands try to get into the space, and what they should be doing is saying, maybe we leave that to these guys. Maybe we can utilize a Mr. Beast. Maybe we can utilize this creator over here. But our job is not necessarily to keep attention for 3 hours. I wanted to highlight this case because I think it's a really important, not this case, but this idea of attention span. And I think my conspiracy theory is why a lot of people don't go to the movie theater anymore. And it's by watching the Gen Z and watching some of my friends and some of the older adults or the younger adults that I have in my life at home watching Netflix. Everybody is in both watching TV mode or watching Netflix and also scrolling mode. They're doing both at the same time. And I think that's an interesting thing. So if we say they have no attention span, then this doesn't hold water, because they're able to watch that to some degree and are able to do this to some degree as well. So their focus is split. And I believe that one of the reasons why cinemas are failing is because you can't have your phone open during a cinema. That would just be rude and annoying. But that's actually what people want to do. That's their natural behavior, is to do both at the same time now. And so it's not a short, it's not a short attention span. It's a short attention span for what I want to look at this particular moment. And if there's a slowdown in the story, I'm going to pull up my phone and start scrolling. So it just highlights how much attention they actually are able to take in. Myth here is that they do not like ads. And I think this myth has come about because we've seen that ads that don't look like ads perform the best. And I think when we say they don't like bad ads, that is what we're trying to get at. We're trying to say that they don't like things that suck. They don't like ads that don't entertain. They don't like ads that aren't insightful, that are just standard sort of wallpaper ads that you could see anywhere, that don't give any sort of insight, the sort of buy now, hard sell ads. They don't like that. If it's clever, it's self-aware, which is really important. If it's memeable, even better, they'll share it. They'll even love it. And around certain things like Super Bowl, like Christmas, like big holidays, they'll even be more interested in those ads because they're part of the cultural zeitgeist and they want to be a part of the cultural zeitgeist. So ads do work. It's just a matter of how you put them together. On top of that, it really matters who is sending that ad. So as a brand, you also have to look at, okay, should we be the sender of this ad? Or should we be tapping into creators? Should we be tapping into influencers? How can people, be experiencing this ad? Oftentimes, we will be the only, sender of the ad, the brand. But there's so many ways an ad can get out. It can also be influencers reacting to an ad. It can be influencers or creators in the ad. It can be a newspaper or a media outlet reacting to an ad. It could be someone reproducing a scene from that ad and doing it as like a content creator sort of thing. There's so many ways of getting an ad out there these days, and sometimes that matters as much as the ad itself. So when you're doing ads, think about these things. Think about how do we distribute this? Because one channel is really not the option. There's so many channels. I'm not talking about like, oh, Facebook ads, Twitter ads, TikTok ads. Yes, of course. But what are the other distribution channels that we can get this ad out of? If it's good, if it's crap, I can't really help you there. I would say don't spend your time distributing crap. But if you've got something that you really think is good, you've tested it, everybody loves it, the Gen Z love it, or the audience that you're trying to get love it, then it's worthwhile talking about how do we get more reach out of this. Now, because they love ads, and because they're not because they love ads, because they love good ads, and because the identity is fractured, and because there's so many channels, and because there's so many places to see an ad, like I mentioned, the different distribution platforms or distribution tactics, I say brands are a little bit like elephants. And here's a good illustration of that. So, and customers are blind, right? So a customer is feeling this elephant. It's like, oh, this is a rope, or this is a wall, or this is a pillar. And the truth is, like, that's how they see brands. No one sees a whole brand anymore. They only see fragments. They only see memes of the brand. They only see influencer takes. They only see TikToks, somebody reviewing the product. They might never ever see that huge ad campaign that you run. They might only see small snippets of something that they caught their attention on. They might see a comment. They might see a comment section roast about the brand. They might see many, like a PR story on it. So your brand is a mosaic, not a monolith. Your brand is really this mix of all of these different impressions. And so if you're looking to build a great brand, or you're looking to do great advertising, you have to think of yourself as fragments and see, how do we build a more fragmented brand, not a monolith brand? And some of the best brands are doing this. We see KFC doing this. We see Burger King. We see even McDonald's. I know, McDonald's has been the top, has been really a monolith brand for many years. We actually see them fragmenting a lot more nowadays, and I'll show you guys some examples. Nike, Duolingo, who's mentioned a lot as a Gen Z brand. These brands are starting to get the sense, oh, we are multiple things to multiple people. We are not just Do It anymore. We are not just, I'm loving it anymore. We are all over the map. So how do we start to play in those areas? And I've got some tips for you guys here on that. And this just goes back to my point about why that is. And that's basically because Gen Z was raised on everything, raised on TikTok, YouTube, Discord, Reddit, meme culture, creator content, like hyper or fragmented micro moments. Their brand discovery journey is nonlinear and it's chaotic. They don't just watch an ad, they encounter those brand fragments, right? And I already mentioned how they encounter that brand is almost as important as the product itself. So, there's this myth that Gen Z broke the marketing funnel. And I would argue that no, that was already being broken by the generation that came before them and the generation before them, because the media is broken up. The media that we all consume on a daily basis is so fragmented. So it's not that they demand a different funnel or a different journey, a discovery journey to purchase. No, it's simply because those places that people used to use to buy stuff, run a TV ad, run a national TV campaign, run a national newspaper campaign, and make sure your product is stocked in the shelves and you'll sell stuff. That doesn't exist anymore. And that's not a Gen Z thing. That's a global thing. That is every single generation has this. So And it's so everybody's brand discovery journey is nonlinear and chaotic, and oftentimes goes down in the DMs. I did a post the other day about how, silent socials are a really big thing these days, because people sharing things, saving things, messaging people with certain, content, certain ad campaigns, that is driving a lot of purchases that we can't even get our hands on because we can't even see those things. They're behind, they're behind the DMs, they're behind the security, they're behind trackability. So those things are all contributing to this hyper fragmented world, and brands have to adjust to that if they haven't already. So brands, you're not this giant canvas, you're actually the paintbrush. So when you have to look at yourself, it's not like, oh, we've got this guideline that we should have. It's more about, how do we shape our brand and not restrict it? How do we enable experimentation? How do we use culture as the paintbrush, as the paint that we're painting with? And we can get weird, we can get surprising, we can get remixable, we can do multiple things with our brand, as long as we have some core tenets, as long as we have a good solid foundation and know what we're about, then we can experiment, then we can go off in this direction and that direction. So for example, the old model used to be linear storytelling, right? From brand to consumer. We are this thing, and this is what we're about, and you should buy us because it's like Volvo, right? Like everybody knew that Volvo was the safety car, the safest car on the market. And yes, they still have that backbone, but you can see that they've gone away from those discussions now. They're still have that as a backbone, but they're tapping into luxury, and they're tapping into experience, and they're tapping into drivability and sustainability, and they're talking about many different aspects of the product now, and not just harping on safety. So this is a good clear example of that. Another good example is co-creation that we're having for Liquid Death here. I don't know if anybody knows Liquid Death, the water brand. It was sort of a small niche brand for a while that a lot of creative people and people within the skateboard world knew about, but it's become a mainstream product now. And this is a good example. Like, what the heck does Elf Cosmetics and canned water have in common, and why should they collaborate? It makes almost no sense at all, but it does when you're thinking about the audience that you want to achieve with this. And so Liquid Death quite rightly said, hey, we want to reach makeup girlies. We want to reach younger girls that are not drinking this, because we're sort of stuck with skateboarders and designers and sort of counterculture people. How do we do this, and how do we do this effectively? Okay, well, let's bring these two brands together. So Elf probably would have never done this kind of makeup world, this kind of universe. So it allowed them also to play in this universe. It allowed Liquid Death to play in this universe. And then we get this really unique micro sort of campaign that pulls on these different pieces. So each post, each product, each collab is a tile in this mosaic. And as long as we keep to our core, we can really do these things. You saw Liquid Death at Bilka. Yeah. So Madalena here, they are mainstream now, right? So they were hard to get in Europe. They were hard to get even in the States. They were only at Whole Foods, but now they become a mainstream product, largely because they've been doing things like this, largely because they've been expanding their audience as much as possible, right? Because they're like, hey, we can't just be, this skateboard rock metal sort of brand for too long, because it's too niche. We'll never go out of this. And they say, okay, let's do more of this. And they understand that their brand is a mosaic that they can tap into. They can tap into comedy. They can tap into serious issues. They can tap into sustainability. They can tap into music. They can tap into art and culture and all these things. And you can too if you're running a brand today. You just have to recognize that experimentation sometimes doesn't work out, and sometimes it gives you great results, but it's important that you experiment. Otherwise, you stay stagnant and you won't be reaching the right audiences in the future. Another myth here, Gen Z is all about authenticity. We hear this all the time. Authenticity, authenticity. You got to be real. You got to be honest. You got to be. The truth is, yes, but not not the kind of authenticity that you wrote in the brief. And it's not the authenticity you filmed in a $3,000 production with an influencer faking their own vulnerability. They really want raw, relatable, real energy, not staged sincerity, right? So they recognize that we live in a fake world. They recognize that, you know, reality TV or influencers that they see have been paid for this product, and we live in a world of complete artificial intelligence these days, almost Botox and IG filters. So they recognize that there's a lot of fakeness in the world. So, and they can smell that out. So they want true authenticity, or they want you to be so self-aware that you recognize that you're being a fantasy, that you're putting on a show, that you are both a serious company, but also able to laugh at yourselves. And if you don't have that real authenticity, you will struggle a bit with this audience. They can smell it, and you need to work on that. And you need to figure out, okay, how do we do this? How do we be real and raw while still being a commercial company? And that's a difficult one to do. Or you don't play in those lanes at all, and you say, okay, we're going complete fantasy. We recognize that we're too big of a company, or we're not able to be this raw and relatable. We're not able to show all of our flaws and, you know, be this authentic. It's too scary. Compliance, you know, risk, lawyers, wah, wah, wah. We'll play with fantasy, and that's fine. And I bring this up because I show this nice new ad from Apple. I don't know if you guys have seen it, but the new Apple iPod ad, or sorry, not iPod, sorry, AirPod ad with Pedro Pascal. It's all about fantasy, right? It's creating a world, it's creating a universe, it's dealing with real human emotions, but we're using a paid actor, and the audience can play along. The Gen Z audience, every audience can play along with this fantasy and be in love with the sheer craziness of it. Yes, they filmed it in a $3,000 production studio, probably more, probably $1 million, but they're not faking vulnerability, not in that way. They know that this is a play. They know this is an act. This is not like being sold something that is bullshit. So they can see right through those things. And so leaning more towards fantasy, humor, stage stuff, and recognizing that it's staged is a really good tactic for those brands that cannot be raw and relatable. You can leave those things to the influencers and the creators creating their own products these days, and you can play over here in Fantasyland, which I think would be very good for a lot of brands. Next myth is that they're not loyal to brands. So the thing is with that fragmentation, like we talked about, fragmented media, fragmented identities, you know, jumping onto trends here and there, it can often seem that they're not loyal to brands, that they'll buy anything. They'll see something like, oh my God, and this week's trend is Stanley Cups, and next week's trend is this over here. And, you know what I mean? It can seem like they're not loyal to brands. And the reality is that they're loyal to sort of energy and not necessarily platforms that you've built. So they'll follow brands across different formats. And if you know how to adapt with them, like Liquid Death is doing, sort of adapting for different audiences, then you can really build a loyal base with them. So if you adapt with their identity, it's still staying with what, you know, your core is, but playing, experimenting, like I mentioned before, then you can keep their attention. Then you can keep going. And I would also say not venturing too much into this, jumping on this hot button political issue, this, save the planet thing over here, and then this commercial thing over here, because that disjointedness on the value side will shine through. But you can be a little bit more experimental with your brand across creative things, across campaigns, across collabs. Be that mosaic brand, give them that energy, show them. I really think that a lot of brands need to, what I call, build in public, which is basically build your campaigns in public, build your identity in public, because that's what they're essentially doing as well. They're building their identity in public as they Snapchat their way to their next trend. So letting them in behind the scenes, we talk a lot about that, and showcasing your creative process really can be a good thing as well. So yeah, loyal to energy. Oops. Myth is that this next myth is Gen Z just wants to be entertained, and I told you guys that I would bring McDonald's back into this discussion. The truth is that I would say this is one that they don't want just to be entertained, but it's the price of admission. And what I mean by that is that is the basic. You have to be somewhat interesting, and not necessarily entertaining, but interesting. And in order to do that, oftentimes you just have to entertain. But what they really want is this meaning layered in, these things that are a little bit more self-aware, like I mentioned, culture coded content. And a good example here is actually the McDonald's anime series that they've developed. So those of you that are into anime, I don't know if you guys are, but I wasn't until I learned about this. I had to do some research, but McDonald's, in all anime, McDonald's logo is flipped upside down to avoid copyright issues, right? So it's McDonald's, or it's not even mentioned as McDonald's. It's just in anime, they just, every time someone's a fast food restaurant employee, they put a W instead of a golden arches. And so McDonald's takes this in and goes, hey, we can do something funny with this. Why don't we do our own anime series? Why don't we do some content around this? Call it McDonald's, not McDonald's, and really showcase that actually we are self-aware. We understand that this is happening. And that's that culture coded content that I'm saying wins. Now, it's also this mosaic approach that McDonald's is doing here, because this doesn't feature, their traditional advertising at all. It doesn't have really nice looking meals and, this deal and that deal. This is just, we're going to make something a little bit niche, a little bit entertaining, and we're going to lay on this coded culture thing and see who loves it. And of course, the Gen Z audience loves it, right? Those who are into anime, then those who aren't in anime go, whoa, what's going on with this? I need to learn about this, and they get interested in it. And so it also drags in people that may not understand what this is, like it did for me. So wrapping this up, Gen Z doesn't just want to be entertained. You can't just do funny stuff. Of course you can, but I wouldn't suggest it. I would say what really is working is when you layer in meaning. You find these insights. You go to Reddit. You go and see, what are people saying about our brand? What funny, interesting takes are they have? What are we getting roasted in the comments about? Can we take that and layer that into our advertising and do something interesting with it? So we're playing the game. We're playing along here. We're not just putting something out and saying, hey, go watch this. We're building the marketing with you, dear audience. And that's a really smart play. And I think one of the things that brands struggle with when it comes to entertaining content, that's why I brought this up, is because, and it goes back to maybe Liquid Death as well and their sort of thing, is that a lot of brands don't like friction. And great storytelling, great entertainment, great marketing usually involves friction, usually involves surprise. It involves doing things that are out of the ordinary, and it not necessarily, it feels a little bit rough because can we play in this area? Can we not? And so you have to be able to weather that storm and take a little bit of friction, because people don't just want alignment. They want surprise. They want to see the chicken wings and nail polish. They want to see vodka and water brands collaborating. They want to see things that can go together, kinda, like you can kind of see them go together, but it's still enough randomness and it's still enough curiosity to be strategic, to be interesting. So find those areas in your brand where it's like, it's just adjacent. It's like, yes, we're all about working out, but could we do something with a chip brand or a fast food brand? Could we do something that is like within the culture? Can we see people talk about, oh, this is, you know, I love this product, but I also use it in this way, like Red Bull and vodka, for example, or whatever those things are. Can we combine those things together? Because if you're not entertaining, you just don't exist. And one of the things I wanted to bring up with this is this latest report from Tracksuit and Small Worlds, where they basically did this analysis of what brands are doing well, how are they doing it, and they've found out there's a couple key points here, and you can find this on the web if you go search Tracksuit and Small Worlds, Entertain or Die, that they believe that all attention must be earned nowadays, and all advertising must be somewhat entertaining nowadays. And if you're not competing with because you're not competing with your category anymore, you're competing with the chaos. And I really believe this. You're competing with every single person on the planet that's creating content, every single brand that's creating content, influencers. You're competing with their friend down the street who's sending them Snapchats. You're competing with every piece of media that we consume on a day-to-day basis. And it's just a lot of chaos. So unless you're doing something that is entertaining, that is capturing attention, that is keeping attention, that is building brand, that is focused on the mosaic, focused on those fragments, you're losing out in this game. And I would suggest that based on this idea, based on doing these things, it's not necessarily about, is this perfectly polished? Is all of this stuff that we're doing amazingly great? It's more about, can this scale? Can an idea, can a thing that we're working on, can it be out there faster? Can we iterate on this? Can we get 50 creators to riff on this and bring in 50 different creative ideas and still feel on brand? That's the creative maturity that we're seeing nowadays. A good example of this is this case study from Google during the Super Bowl, where actually they had one big Super Bowl hero ad, but then they also created 50 different local ads. So they had this one big idea and then created 50 ads per state. They were local, they were personal, they were specific. They basically scaled it and they decentralized delivery. So each, you know, market had their own thing. And it's got one product in mind. It's the Gemini AI product. And this is a mosaic approach in action here. This is taking the product idea, taking the big campaign idea and like spreading it out across many things, right? So they had different entrepreneurs, different businesses, different people that use Gemini AI in the market and giving their stories about how they're actually using AI. It's a brilliant way of taking this mosaic concept and spreading it out. And Doritos is another case that's doing this extremely well. They are taking they're taking basically creators and saying, hey, here's our core idea. What would you do with this? And they're getting, during Super Bowl, they got a ton of attention, a ton of entertaining value, a lot of brand value. They use small creators, large creators. They use like basically everybody they could get their hands on and basically said, here's our idea. What would you do with this? And just the amount of creativity they came out. And this is brand mosaic in action, and it works. They are now considered, you know, 8 points higher than any other chip brand when it comes to this category, and in terms of likability, in terms of purchase, you know, intent, all that kind of stuff. So they're really ahead of the curve with everybody, and it's because they're thinking about their brand in these terms. So wrapping it up a little bit here, guys, and then we'll get to some questions. According to McKinsey, and also according to me a little bit, is what is Gen Z actually expecting to actually earn their loyalty that we talked about? So they want authenticity, and we talked about what that is, over polish. So they don't need, you know, super polished stuff unless it's in fantasy land, which is also totally fine. They want more purpose-driven stuff, but it doesn't have to be, it has to be analogous, or it has to be connected to your brand, or it doesn't make sense. It won't be authentic. Over perfection. They want access to you guys. They want access to play along. They want to be involved in these things. and you don't market to them, you market with them. And I think that's I want to land on this one a lot. You don't market to them, you market with them. You take in their memes, their ideas, you do some social listening. You figure out what areas can we play with our brand with them, and you bring them in and market with them. And that's a really interesting switch that we love to try to get our clients into. So how do you start winning with them? Stop judging, you start understanding. You embrace the tension that exists within them and their fragmented way. You try to find places where you can scale your story into that, take one idea and say, okay, hey, let's run with it in many, many ways. How do you build a mosaic brand? How do you find that be culturally fluent with what's going on there, like McDonald's was doing? And then you let creators, you let employees, you let agencies with creator mindsets in to expand on it, to give you new ideas, to really bring that experimentation in. And you entertain or die trying. So that's all. It's time to grow up. Gen Z isn't the problem. Your strategy is, perhaps. If you're still blaming them for being too online, too broke, too inconsistent, respectively, it's time to grow up, and let's figure out how do we market with them. So that's it from me. I will open up the floor now to you guys. If you have any questions, I would love to tackle them. And what I'll do here is I will look at the chat. If you guys want to roll some, if you guys want to add any questions in the chat, I can take them here. Or if you want to leave, I understand that too. You got other stuff to work on. I can also open it up for you guys to unmute yourselves if you want to take it as a you can turn on your microphones if you want to answer through audio instead. No messages, no questions. Oh yeah. David, I love David is throwing me a lifeline here. He's like, okay, I can't let my boss have no questions. So he's asking David on my team, he's our head of strategy, which platforms, or strategy director rather, which platforms or formats are currently underrated for reaching Gen Z? That's a good question. I would say that in general, outdoor is really underrated. We think of everybody as being completely online all the time, and a great outdoor can really move mountains nowadays and do really well. And you don't necessarily need to be on every single corner, on every single bus stop. You just need to have the right placement. So I would say that's super underrated to actually reaching the right audiences, specifically the Gen Z audiences, with great outdoor activations. And then another format that I think is underrated for Gen Z is that's a good question. What was the last one I had in mind there? I mean, I would say that what's overrated is podcasts. I think we think that we can, produce, like brands think that they can produce podcasts that are competing with some of the biggest podcasts in the world and do well there. I think it's completely overrated and almost impossible to do without huge sums of money. So I would say stay away from podcasts if you're trying to reach anyone these days, unless you're willing to go completely broad as possible. Otherwise, might as well buy your way into podcasts and just sponsor the popular ones. Thomas says Gen Z is aging and behavioral changes can be expected in the future. They'll be more mature, right? Yeah, but I think that, like I said, I think it's not just necessarily a Gen Z thing. I think everybody's living in this fragmented media culture. Everybody's living in this world. I think the one thing that's unique to Gen Z is that their identity is a bit more fluid and sort of they're jumping onto things all the time. And I think that's probably all young people do that, and everybody young, they're always searching for new stuff, and the sort of older people, the millennials, the Xers and boomers, they're a little more secure in their identity, so they're not necessarily jumping around a lot. So we will see the Gen Z age up. We will see them become more, the shifting landscape won't be as, or the shifting identity won't be as big anymore. I also think that what we're seeing, which I didn't get into, is also politically, we're seeing Gen Z men being right-leaning and Gen Z women being left-leaning. I think that's going to have a massive impact on advertising. We didn't even touch that here, but I think it depends on if you're trying to go for women or you're trying to go for men. Your tactics or your brand purpose or your brand identity will need to be, maybe try to do both or try to like stick with one, or yeah, we'll see how that political landscape plays out, but that's also really interesting. Jen said, thank you so much. I would like to ask how we can translate this to employer branding, communicating to Gen Z as an employer. Yeah, that's a really good question. I think you have to, as a employer trying to get Gen Z in, I think you have to showcase a lot more the aspects of the job that appeal to them, which is going to be a whole host of things that we didn't have here. But Gen Z want way more freedom. They have had financial, I mean, everything's more expensive. So you're going to have to highlight how much money they can make. Like even, job posts nowadays are putting in how much money they are, how much salary they're going to get. You'll have to highlight the amount of time they have off, the freedom that they have in their job, those things. So really look at what separates you as an employer towards those younger audiences compared to your competition, and harness those things. And you can't fake it. Like you can't. I think that you show the warts and all. I think you really show the authenticity of it. You don't. You let your current Gen Z employees do content. Hire them as content creators. Showcase what is it like to work in this place. So market with them, don't market to them. And that applies to employer branding as well. So how do you market with them? Well, you use your current Gen Z employees and you ask them, hey, what do we do here? How can we do this? Can you guys, produce some stuff? What would you do to highlight how it is to work here? We actually did a good, I don't think I can talk about it yet, but we did a good Gen Z recruiting campaign for a large medical device company. We'll say that. I don't know. Dave's probably like, don't say anymore. But we did a good recruitment campaign for that. And that was one of the things we did. We interviewed all of their Gen Z staff, not all, but a large percentage, and said, like, what is interesting for you here? Why are you here? What's good? What was good about your internship program here? What would you say to others that want to work here? And getting those insights from them was super impactful. For brands who want to show, so Brandon asked, for brands who want to show their authenticity, how will you prevent other Gen Zs to see those actions as too much? The thing is that this is what's interesting. So cringe culture is sort of dying, right? So we're seeing this ownership now within the market of, I'm going to own the greatness that I am. I'm going to own, I don't want to be like, I can be seen as being too much. Nowadays, I can basically say, hey, we're great. We're good at this. We do good. And as long as it's authentic, as long as you're being real about it, you can do that. You can be proud. You can never be too much. So I would say lean into that. Others that Gen Z, others that think it's too much, they're probably actually more leaning towards the millennial sort of, or afraid of being too cringy, too boomery. We're seeing the opposite for Gen Z nowadays. They're like, bring on the awkwardness. We want to see it. We want to see too much. So Angelo said goodbye. That's great. Pinar said, hello. I feel like maybe FMCG sectors, it is easier to create fun contents online, but how do you think financial sectors? I mean, this is a really good example, like really good question, because we get this all the time. Like I say there's no boring industries, just boring people. And I know that's a bit hard to say, but the reality is that there's always interesting ways of tackling less fun concepts, less fun content online. A good example is BlackRock, or was it? I forget the name. It was either BlackRock or maybe it was somebody else. But it's a financial institution, and they're actually getting their sort of boomer and Gen X employees to do really interesting, like very, very authentic content. They're not trying to like speak Gen Z. They're not like, hey, skibbity Ohio Riz, what's up? Like that is BS. They look right through that. They're like, listen, don't use that. That's so cringy. That's so, well, I just said you could be cringe, but that's a level where it's just too, that is a level where they're like, that's inauthentic. We know you don't talk that way. Stop trying to talk that way. But they're a financial institution, and they've done wonders with the Gen Z, just breaking down financial concepts in a super simple and informative way and they found a way to do it in an entertaining way. So go sort of find them. But you have to strip all your ideas about what you should do as an industry and start experimenting, start looking at, and it takes guts and it takes buy-in from the organization, and it's tough. You really have to advocate for it, and you will have everybody in the organization saying, we can't do this. This is not acceptable. We're a bank, or we're a technology firm. We're dealing with billions of dollars of risk every day. I mean, you can't do, and it's like, yeah, Blackstone. Thanks, Dave. So Blackstone was the name, not BlackRock. BlackRock is the other guys that own everything on the planet. But yeah, Blackstone did a really good job. Go check them out. So, and then you can use those cases, find cases of boring industries that, boring industries, and I don't believe there is, but, boring industries that have done well, and say, hey, look, guys, if they can do it, we can do it. And so find examples to try to get that buy-in. One last question, guys, and then we'll run from Christine. Hi, Chris. Really great summary. How do you see LinkedIn as reaching Gen Z within SaaS industry? Or would you recommend sticking to TikTok? No, I think the Gen Z is definitely taking a look at LinkedIn. It's not huge yet for them. They still think it's not a viable platform because they feel like it's too grown up. But it is changing, and obviously LinkedIn is focused on vertical video and influencers now, and trying to build up these more Facebook style, personal style is what they're pushing in the feed. So it is getting to that place, but it's a slow boat. I would say that I would stick to I would definitely, I mean, TikTok is super underutilized when it comes to recruiting, or when it comes to reaching Gen Z audiences for things other than clothes, makeup, FMCG. Like there's a lot of opportunity if you do extremely well with your content, and have that brand mosaic attitude, and have that entertainment attitude, and have that market with them attitude. There's a lot of opportunity there. So I wouldn't stick to one thing. I mean, go for everything. It's just the problem is with advertising on LinkedIn, you got to go by seniority, not necessarily age. So focus on, low seniority people, and then typically you're going to reach that Gen Z audience. So thank you guys so much for being here. I really appreciate your time and your energy, and for, sticking with us and your questions. I hope you got some great insights. I hope you learned something, and I hope you can apply it to your job. If you have any desire to reach out to us, I'm available. You guys have my email. I've been, open with that. So just shoot me a mail if you have any additional questions, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks so much.